All right, so I think I left off talking about process ontology and the idea of getting over not just the Cartesian view of mind, but also the Cartesian view of nature as sort of an extended world of objective objects composed of what it calls vacuous actualities, sort of dead insentient matter, um, which has um, a real location rather than a relative location. And instead of going toward a process ontology, which sees reality as composed of events rather than substances and is inherently relational. I guess I'd like to move here to understanding what consciousness would actually mean in this ontology. So, you know, I take this wine glass right here. Okay, so so here we have an object, composed of atoms and particles, right? So we get light hitting the object and bouncing off and scattering, and it goes towards my eye, and then hits the retina, and then the retina goes to the optic nerve. Optic nerve goes to my brain, and my brain processes it. And according to the original story, during that processing, we then finally get consciousness, where I'm finally conscious of that glass. Now, for embodied cognition, the consciousness starts at the body barrier. I mean, basically each sort of philosophy of mind has its own barrier. For some, it's the brain. The brain is, for the sort of mind-brain identity theorists, that's the barrier at which consciousness starts. For the sort of the embodied cognition, the I is the barrier. It's sort of like, okay, my whole body is part of my mind. So my eye, my retina, my lens, that's all part of my mind, and it's perceiving an outside world. For phenomenological externalism, the whole process is consciousness. The perceived and perceiver are, in a sense, one. There is a non-duality between perceived and perceiver. The subject-object relation is illusory, and it's actually the relationship itself, which is really real. That we are sort of who we are is basically a network of relations, of interior relations, as Whitehead put it. So I'm thinking, okay, well that's fine for directly perceived things. What about things like dreams and memory and imagination? Should we stop being conscious when we close our eyes? But if we think about it, it's not really that big of a leap. With memory, I mean, we're still perceiving a process. There's still the past is still a thing that's prehended by us. We can appeal to Bergson's idea about memory, which is the past is this singularity, which basically it's like one united thing that is here, that is present. The past is present, and so perceiving memories is not really much different than perceiving our environment. The memory is just part of our environment because the past is with us right now. It is sort of a pattern that is with us today. And so then with dreams and imagination, we basically have, we can combine memories together to create novel ideas. So I mean, basically, dreams and imagination are memory plus novelty. And that's where it's really interesting, because in Whitehead's system, novelty is where he introduces the concept of God. He talks about creativity as a sort of is sort of omnipresent thing, and Whitehead and God kind of creates this ordering of what's called eternal objects or archetypes. So to sort of direct direct the creativity towards a sort of progressive and creating what we know as novelty. So I won't get too deep into that because the topic of this video is not theology but consciousness. So basically the next thing we need to look at is so what is the role of the brain and neurons? I mean I think that might be one of the big critiques that people have of externalism and of panexperientialism, which is, okay, well, if consciousness is somehow sort of external to the brain, what do we need a brain for? What is the role of neurons? So I think we have to look at the structure of neurons to understand what they do. So what are neurons? They're cells, just like skin cells or muscle cells or fat cells, or any other cells in our body. They have a nucleus, they have mitochondria, they have cytoplasm, just like all of those. In fact, a lot of the sort of neural transmitters, sort of chemical messages that neurons send, are found in other cells, including single-celled organisms. So how are neurons different? Well, I mean, there's the shape of neurons. If you look at a neuron, they're very branch-like. They spread out with different branches and allows them to form complex networks. And so it seems like through the structure of neurons, they're able to communicate faster than other cells, like skin cells, for example. And so for the emergentist view of consciousness, like the one advocated by John Searle, I say, aha! So at some point of at a given point of complexity, there's enough network effect that finally this thing called consciousness emerges out of that, and then we have consciousness. But I think this really confuses the concept of emergence. So what is emergence? It's basically where the whole is the sum of the parts, where the parts come together in a way that this new whole is created, which is different from the parts. So let's take the phenomenon of water or wetness. Like we were talking about with semantic externalism and the twin world theory. So water, it's composed of 2 parts hydrogen and 1 part oxygen, H2O molecules. Now we know that water at room temperature is liquid. So what is liquid? It has a certain. It's less solid. It doesn't have the sort of solidity of ice that you can sort of put your hand in it. You can put your hand through water and it moves, and the water goes moving around, but it still has a kind of tactile sensation where it's where it's not as free to move around as in air. So we can understand the liquidity of water by understanding how close together the particles are, and at that certain at a certain distance from each other, it creates the effect of what we know as liquid. It behaves in a liquid pattern. But then to get from liquid to wetness, where does wetness come from? Well, here's the interesting thing: is that wetness we can't explain through the physical properties of water. We have to explain through the interaction of those physical properties with consciousness. Wetness is what's known as qualia. It's an internal relation of liquid with perception. So the perceiver touches his hand in water. He perceived wetness through his internal relations between the liquid and himself. And so we can't really think of consciousness as emergent in the same way as wetness, because that form of emergence requires consciousness in order to exist. And so if we think of consciousness as emergent in the sense that liquid is, well, we have to explain how this network effect of multiple neurons creates this thing called phenomenal consciousness. And if we can't do that, then we're left with mysterianism. It becomes just, consciousness remains just as mysterious as it ever was within that paradigm. So, but if we instead see experience as fundamental, then we can understand how neurons give rise to consciousness. And this is why Dave Griffin uses the term panexperientialism rather than panpsychism. He talks about experience rather than consciousness. And actually why Whitehead used the term prehension. Because we don't want to talk about consciousness at the like level of electrons or what have you. Because consciousness is a little more complex. Basically, consciousness is a matter of contrast. Whereby we can compare what we're experiencing now with different potentials of what we could be experiencing. That's how imagination works. That's basically, you know you're in pain because you know what it's like to not be in pain. And so when you have experience without the contrast, we have what's known as the subconscious. And that's what Freud was talking about. That we experience things without being conscious of them. That's basically that's what subconscious is. It's experience that's below the threshold of consciousness. So if we have enough neural connections, the different experiences are coming together to contrast with each other, then we create the sort of contrast necessary to create consciousness. So by taking the panexperientialist perspective, the hard problem of consciousness becomes an easy problem by eliminating the subject-object duality and understanding sort of experiential nature of mind and matter, and that matter exists relative to mind and mind exists relative to matter, and that both of them are really not two. They have a non-dual relationship. So I hope this was clear enough. Thanks for listening, and peace.